Good morning, everybody. Time for the MLB Strategy Show. We are sponsored by Prize Picks this morning. Do us a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got an 11-game slate tonight. No Coors Field, so DraftKings was not able to fuck up that pricing today. But it doesn't mean there wasn't other pricing for them to screw up, because there is a whole bunch of pitchers and other players that are underpriced, which is going to make for decision points for us once again today. Adam, how are you feeling about today's 11-game slate?
Looking forward to it. Yesterday was pretty good. Got fifth in both the early slate and main slate big tournaments on DraftKings. So feeling good going into today. Looking forward to another slate where I assume pricing is going to be completely broken.
Wait, you got exactly fifth on both slates?
Yeah.
That's number one, awesome. That's congrats. That good finishes, but also crazy coincidence. A double slate and you take fifth on both of them. That's a very random and like exact spot. It's just coincidence.
Yeah, too bad. Yeah, it would have been a lot cooler if it was first, obviously, but same chances, I guess.
Yeah, and it just as easy to finish last. Some would say. Yeah. I know that some people in chat might say that they are that's what they specialize in, is finishing last on both slates, which is why we are here to help all you guys out. One more time, do us a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel as we start to break down this slate. And we'll get right into the first game of the night. Cincinnati Reds, New York Yankees. We've got Luis Castillo on the mound for the Reds, having another solid year, 3.37 ERA, 25.3% K rate. But it's obviously a brutal matchup against the New York Yankees. So what are you going to do with this spot? Because Castillo is a high upside pitcher. The Yankees clearly a high upside offense. Which side of either do you prefer to get to in tournaments?
Yeah, I think ownership normally drives my decision-making here. I mean, Castillo is very good, but obviously so are the Yankees. Right now, I am looking at the top golfers tool, which is not doing any good.
It's about 1% aggregate ownership going to the Yankees today, 7% for Castillo. So right now, the field is not really playing either side.
Yeah, that was going to be my assumption, which kind of always makes both sides look interesting. On an 11-game slate, I assume you're going to be able to find pretty good pitching in better spots. Pitching doesn't look great on this slate, but there are certainly some good arms. But the Yankees right now, we have them with a 5% chance of being the top stack, 1.5% aggregate ownership. Again, I do think Castillo is very good, but anytime you're not getting ownership going to the Yankees, it's going to be, I think, a pretty appealing spot to get to. One thing with Castillo that does stand out, though, is that he's allowed virtually no power to right-handed hitters this year. He's held them to both a real and an expected ISO below 100, as opposed to lefties where he's allowed an expected ISO of 189. So, again, not to say that you can't play the Yankees, because, again, it's still the same thing. Like, it's a good pitcher. It's a really good offense at no ownership, but it does kind of work against them that he's been so good at limiting right-handed power, when that, outside of Anthony Rizzo and the reincarnation of Matt Carpenter, is essentially all that they have.
Yeah. Well, they do have Joey Gallo, but
True.
He's kind of what Matt Carpenter was before this year. Joey Gallo just sucks now. I don't know what happened. And for the longest time, I thought he was a player who was undervalued by the public just because he had a low batting average. He strikes out a lot, which is stuff that a lot of people just look at and will blanketly say, oh, this guy isn't good at baseball, but he plus fielder and crazy good power and drew a lot of walks. So the on-base percentage was always there, which didn't really matter as much to me. Like, why do I care if somebody is a single or a walk? They're not that much different from each other. But this year doesn't get on base at all, and he's not even really hitting the homer. So, yeah, not a lot of left-handed bats to look at in the Yankees lineup. But, 1% ownership for the Yankees in the course of 150 lineups, it's almost always going to be a spot to get overweight too.
Yeah, it's just I just firmly believe that kind of if you ignore who they're facing, if you tell me the Yankees are 1% owned and you play them every single time during the course of the season, you probably come out ahead.
And then on the other side of the mound, it is going to be Nestor Cortes for the Yankees. And overall, his numbers for the season, they're solid. He has definitely had a decrease overall in his output as of late and his fantasy production, which I think was to be expected, especially when you consider that Cortes doesn't really have great stuff, struggles to crack even 90 miles per hour on his fastball, and then just gets by with a lot of deception. And it's stuff that, while we have Johnny Cueto on this slate, it could maintain long-term. I do think there's something to be said for once the league gets more of a look at Nestor Cortes, I think he becomes a little bit easier to figure out. Still overall for the year, 2.74 expected ERA, 26.9% K rate. It's an easy matchup against the Reds, who right now have him projected for 17% projected ownership. Where do you stand on him as a tournament option?
So the price tag's come down, which is really nice. And then he's also got the good matchup against the Reds, which also looks good. So right now, 17% ownership, 14% chance of being a top two pitcher. I think both of those things make sense. I agree with you that at least as teams see him more frequently, I would expect them to have more success since he is really deceptive and relies on that as opposed to really good stuff. But it's not like the Reds are a divisional opponent or a common matchup. So I don't think that's as much of an issue here. And then on top of that, they're just not very good. So 27% strikeout percentage, 3.66 xFIP. I do like Cortez at his reduced salary.
Yeah, I think it was a lot harder to get to him in some of these recent leagues because he was still maintaining a price tag over 10K on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So now we've seen that salary come down by, like 13 to 1,500 on some recent slates. And also he's been like 10,100 in spots against the Red Sox, whereas today it's an easier matchup against the Reds. So I haven't played Nestor Cortez in a while, but I think today with him being under 10K on FanDuel and DK and the ownership also coming down, I think it's finally time that we could start rostering this guy again. As for the other side, I have no interest in the Reds offense. I understand that Severino got hurt yesterday and the Reds were able to get to him and they did some damage against the Yankees bullpen, although it was primarily the bottom of the order, which absolutely nobody played. But could the Reds replicate anything they did last night?
I wouldn't expect them to. I don't think that there's any reason to go back to them here. If you wanted to look for some right-handed power against him, I think that's fine. Like you're looking to Brandon Drury, who's having a really, really good year. Jonathan India at 3,300 looks like a really good price tag. But overall, not a particularly appealing offense to get to.
All right, so let's move on to the next game. When I was putting together the run sheet for this game, Adam, I was stunned because I didn't know Anibal Sanchez was still pitching in the big leagues. He's not somebody that's been on my mind, but when I first saw that he was the expected starting pitcher for the Nationals, I had just assumed he's retired. So this is going to be his first start of the season. It is a brutal matchup for him against the Atlanta Braves. What can we expect from Anibal Sanchez, who has not pitched in a couple of years and was dealing with a neck injury earlier this year?
I expect him to get lit up is what I expect.
That seems like a reasonable expectation because we have not seen him pitch since 2020. He only pitched limited innings because he was terrible and nobody wanted him to pitch. And in those limited innings, a 6.62 ERA and a 5.52 expected ERA. It's hard to imagine he's gotten better considering that he hasn't pitched now in 2 years. He was dealing with an injury this year, and he's now 38 years old. So long layoff for Anibal Sanchez. And something else to note about the layoff, his velocity was already well on the decline the last time we saw him pitch. So if you go back to some previous years, his velocity's declined every single season since 2013. 2013, his average fastball velocity was 94 miles per hour, and it slowly dipped by like half a mile per hour per year. So before it got down to 89.6 2 years ago, last time we saw him pitch. Does that mean he's going to be throwing 89 or 88 miles per hour this year? It's possible, but I think the Braves is going to be a really strong spot for them. But that also means we're getting a whole lot of ownership going to the Braves. They are currently projected for the second most ownership on the slate today. Is that problematic at all?
Not really. They're also projected with the highest top stack percentage at 16%. So really it's just going to come down to, what we've seen on previous or what you see on every slate where you just need to balance that out. But one nice thing is that with it being an 11-game slate, ownership's just not going to be crazy high here. And, it's not a core slate, so you're not talking about one of those spots. If you look individually at the Atlanta bats, you have Acuna picking up 25%, all of Swanson, Duvall, Riley, Ozuna, Olsen between 12 and 18%, and then d'Arnaud, Harris, and Arcia sub 10%. So it's a popular team, but they're not so popular that I would be wanting to avoid them in what's clearly a very good spot here.
Yeah, let's see. Do we have some minor league numbers here for Anibal Sanchez? How did that go? Not great, which shouldn't be all that surprising either. So we saw from Anibal Sanchez pitch 15 innings in the minor leagues, and in those 15 innings, he gave up 8 runs. This could be problematic for Anibal Sanchez. If he's working his way back from this injury, he pitched 15 innings, walked 8 guys, was giving up a whole bunch of runs in the minor leagues. It's hard to imagine he's going to find that much more success in the big leagues, particularly against a potent offense in the Atlanta Braves. So this does look like the top team to stack. And like I said, they are going to be really popular, but we still have them with a higher top stack odds than what their ownership is. This is one of those scenarios where a team is going to be popular, but I don't have too much issue with it. On the other side of the game, Kyle Wright is going to be pitching for Atlanta. Really solid season for him on the whole, 3.59 expected ERA, 24.5% K rate. But this is a Nationals team that is kind of hard to strike out. They don't whiff all that often, sub 20% K rate against right-hand pitching. with that in mind, how are you going to be handling Kyle Wright on a slate that's pretty full of high-end starting pitchers?
Yeah, so I mean, the Nats don't strike out a lot. Wright has also seen his strikeout numbers come down a bit recently. He's down to 24.5% for the season. This is someone that not that long ago was, hovering around 27, 28%. And he does project to, I think, have a 22.5, 23% strikeout percentage moving forward. His salary has also decreased a bit to 8,500. Right now, he just kind of looks like one of those pitchers that is going under-owned, but also is relatively low probability compared to some other spots. You have Burns, you have Carlos Rodon, you have Gossman against the Kansas City Royals AAA team. All of those guys are just going to pull a lot of ownership, deservedly so. Then you have that next tier of guys where you have, Nestor Cortez, for example. So I think Kyle Wright is somebody you can use to offset ownership in individual lineups, and it's more likely I use him in that way than that I actually really prioritize getting to him.
Yeah, and also, I hate to address some of this stuff, but Sean V, whatever Jose Urani did in his first start has no bearing on what Anibal Sanchez is going to do today. There's no correlation there.
Yeah, the argument that the Reds are not striking out in Yankee Stadium because Luis Severino didn't strike them out is crazy. And my point with his injury is that he didn't suddenly get hurt. He was probably hurt the entire game, and that had something to do with him getting lit up.
Yeah. So what happened with Severino yesterday, who ended up being pretty popular, is he started pitching his shoulder soreness, tried to tough it out. It wasn't going for him. So they ended up taking him out after a couple of innings. He didn't get hurt in the second inning. He was hurt from the jump in that game. His velocity was down and was just struggling with his stuff. So it sucks when that stuff happens for DFS because there's no way for us to predict that ahead of time. But I would not draw any conclusions on that based on what happened with a hurt pitcher, nor would I say that Anibal Sanchez is going to be good today because Jose Urania got lucky in his first start of the season against the Dodgers. If I remember correctly, he had more walks than strikeouts and just had like a really low BABIP. Anibal Sanchez sucked the last time he was in the big leagues. He sucked in the minor leagues. It's baseball. Things are random, but the most likely scenario here is the Braves hit Anibal Sanchez, not that Anibal Sanchez pitches well.
Right. It's still baseball. Like, it's July, so it should go without saying at this point. But like, there's a ton of volatility and variance in baseball. Hitting is still difficult, and you can hit balls hard and still make outs too. Like, just because a pitcher is bad and clearly overmatched doesn't mean they're going to have a bad start. But you can't go into if you look at every good hitter matchup and say, yeah, but the bad pitcher could do well, and then every good matchup for pitchers and say, yeah, but the bad hitters could do well, you're gonna have a really, really hard time playing MLB DFS.
All right, let's move on to the next game. And it's really rare that we have a whole bunch of news that's going to impact individual slates for baseball. But this is almost like a basketball NBA type DFS situation. The Toronto Blue Jays are at home against the Kansas City Royals. There's no betting line out yet for this game. And I think this is just because there's no expectation of what the starting lineup is going to look like for the Royals, who's going to be in, because this is a series being played in Toronto. And a lot of the players on the Royals are not vaccinated, thus are not able to travel with the Royals for the series. So Whit Merrifield, Andrew Benintendi, Hunter Dozier, Cam Gallagher, MJ Melendez, Brady Singer, Brad Keller, Kyle Isbell, Michael A. Taylor, Dylan Coleman, all of them are unavailable for this series for the Kansas City Royals. Kevin Gausman has missed some time due to a leg injury and hasn't pitched for a little bit. Assuming there's no restrictions on him, this is my favorite pitcher on the slate because as of right now, he's projected for somewhat modest ownership, sub 30%. He's priced down at $8,600 over on DK. On FanDuel, he's a little more expensive at $10,100, but single-digit ownership. I think this is going to be an incredibly easy matchup for Kevin Gausman, and I definitely want to be overweight to him.
Yeah, you're essentially getting him in a minor league rehab start. Like, assuming that he's not limited, you already had a bad Kansas City offense. Now you have Bobby Witt, Vinny Pasquantino, and nothing. Like, their projected lineup that I'm looking at right now, the guys that are in it that have even been like with this team, Olivares, O'Hearn, Rivera, Nicky Lopez, like none of these guys are good. You're going to have several players in there that are up from the minor leagues, I would expect, because it's not just like you had random dudes not make this trip. Normally they start one of Michael A. Taylor or Isbell. They're both gone. Normally Benintendi obviously starts. He's gone. Normally Dozier starts. He's gone. Melendez is gone. So it's just a really, really watered down team. The only, he would clearly be my favorite pitcher if you didn't have both of Carlos Rodon and Corbin Burns going on this slate. But even with them going, as long as we don't get news that he's limited by his ankle injury, you're getting a reduced price tag with Kevin Gausman facing a AAA team.
Yeah, and then another thing too about Gausman is his numbers overall for the season are really, really good. He ran into this stretch for, I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 starts where he was tipping his pitches, and he seems to have figured that out now by using a bigger glove that hides the baseball. But you look at his numbers overall for the year, 2.86 ERA, 3.49 expected ERA, 1.68 FIP. His strikeout rate is 27%. Gausman's had an excellent year, and this is going to be a really bad Royals lineup. There is no reason for me to consider them in tournaments.
Yeah, I don't see it either. And I'm pretty sure Kevin Gossman could just tell them what pitches are coming and probably still have success here.
Yeah, you could go back to tipping the pitches and see if it works with the small glove, because I agree with you. I don't think they'd be able to hit anything.
I mean, he can just stand out there and do, what he does in warmups, like when he tells the pitcher or the catcher what he's about to throw. Just do it before every pitch. I think Trevor Bauer's done it in a game before. But you could just probably go all game and still have success.
Do you know how this works? Do they get replacement level? Do they get minor league call-ups for the next few games? Or are they just playing with a shorthanded roster?
They get a bunch of call-ups.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't seen a team with this shorthand of a roster. I mean, it's like 10 players from the team that aren't able to play, including hitters that are very prominent in line. Like all of their best hitters, other than Bobby Witt, aren't going to be playing today. So really good spot for Kevin Gausman.
Yeah, it's wild. Like every other team, one, no other team has had nearly this many guys not go to Toronto. But two, a lot of times it's just like, oh, these 3 or 4 random relievers aren't going. Like, who cares? But here it's just like, oh yeah, half our lineup and half of our starting pitchers are not making the trip.
Yeah, and I mean, this is going to be a scenario where, once again, Kevin Gausman, I think the ownership probably comes up once people see what the lineup looks like, but maybe not, because it's Corbin Burnes and Carlos Rodon on this slate. On the other side of the game, Jackson Kowar is pitching for the Royals. 6.23 expected ERA for him, 21.7% K rate, 2.4 whip. He has struggled a whole bunch this year. It's hard to not think this is a high upside spot for the Blue Jays, who are oddly not picking up all that much ownership. And we don't have them. So we don't have them projected right now for very high top stack odds. That's going to change once the run line comes out for this game. We always see pretty big adjustments once we get that added to our projections. But for now, a Blue Jays team only project for 4% ownership. That seems too light to me against Jackson Kowar.
Yeah, agreed. I'm also seeing Carlos Hernandez listed some other places, but either way, same answer here. Both of these guys have pretty decent stuff and seem like guys that should be better than they are, talking about Kowar or Hernandez, but neither one is good either. And it's a really, really difficult spot going up against Toronto. So they look absolutely fantastic. Right now, like you said, you can't really pick anything up from the top stacks tool since the line is off. But I would expect that you end up getting ownership coming into Toronto, and it probably pulls down some of the Atlanta ownership, probably pulls down some of the Cleveland ownership, and kind of just turns this back into a slate where within reason, you don't have to worry about ownership too much, and you can just play a lot of these Toronto bets.
Yeah, it's not going to be like we get a 35% owned Padres on an 11-game slate or anything like that. There's going to be none of those kind of spots today. A lot of it's because of just the amount of bad pitchers that are on the slate. And one of them is in this next game, Detroit Tigers against the Cleveland Guardians. How Elvin Rodriguez has landed back on the Tigers roster, it totally beats me. I don't know. He's been miserable this year. 6.19 expected ERA, 16.7% K rate. This guy gets lit up every single time he steps on the mound. And what were his minor league numbers? His minor league numbers actually weren't totally off. He did have a 4.11 FIP and a 4.52 xFIP. But going through his big league starts, these are his last 2 starts he made against the Blue, and they're tough starts, but still against the Blue Jays, he pitched 4 innings, gave up 8 runs and 3 homers. The start before that against the Yankees, he pitched 4 innings, gave up 10 runs and 4 homers. So his last 2 starts, he's combined to give up 7 home runs. The Cleveland Guardians offense isn't quite as good as the Yankees or the Blue Jays, but this is clearly a priority team for me to stack today.
Yeah, completely agree. Right now, we have them getting the most ownership. As I just said, I think as once Toronto's line comes out, you probably see that adjust and Cleveland come down a bit. But Rodriguez, in his limited sample this year, 312 expected ISO to righties, 312 expected ISO to lefties, just giving it up across the board. Jose Ramirez at 5,200 looks absolutely fantastic. Josh Naylor looks very good. Steven Kwan looks like a good value leading off. Franmil Reyes probably can put the ball in play against this guy, which is always a plus for him. Nolan Jones is still 2K flat with outfield eligibility, so you can play him alongside Jose Ramirez. You don't have to choose between the two. Cleveland looks very good here, I think.
Yeah, and somebody was asking, was Elvin Rodriguez tipping his pitches? I mean, maybe, but this is still so extreme. These are such bad results that I just don't think this guy is a big league caliber pitcher right now. Like I said, also his minor league numbers, those were not particularly good. See, what do Steamer and Zips have him for this year? Yeah, this isn't great either. Zips has him projected for a 6.49 ERA as his fair talent level the rest of the season. In all likelihood, this is just not a good pitcher right now. Could he be in the future? Maybe. He throws hard, but as of right now, this is a guy to stack against. Cleveland is going to be really popular. We'll see where the dust settles on their ownership later in the day. But for now, I think this is a team that's going to be difficult to avoid. On the other side of the game, Tristan McKenzie is on the mound for Cleveland. He's been a little disappointing this year. His underlying numbers aren't as good as his actual ERA. His strikeouts are also down. But is the matchup against the Detroit Tigers enough for you to look at McKenzie as a viable mid-range option?
Yeah, it is. He's probably getting a little bit more ownership than he deserves. For example, the thing that stands out right now is that Tristan McKenzie is projected for an 11.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, and he's getting 21% ownership, while Kyle Wright for $200 more is at 9.5%, getting 1% ownership. There clearly shouldn't be that level of there's that much of a gap between McKenzie and Wright, but he does look good here. You have a Tigers team that isn't very good at hitting. They do strike out a lot. And one positive for McKenzie is his strikeout numbers have come down this year, from where they were when he first came up. But when he first came up, he was a guy with electric stuff that had absolutely no idea where it was going. Now he's not walking as many guys. He only has a 7% walk percentage. As a result, not getting as many strikeouts, but at least there was some positive trade-off there. It's not like his strikeout numbers just disappeared, but he also is having issues with power, allowing about 1.6 home runs per 9 innings. So, he's risky. He hasn't been great this year, like you said, but it is a good matchup. He does have a 27% strikeout percentage against lefties in particular, but he's also allowed a 248 expected ISO to lefties, 261 to righties. The Tigers not a team that's particularly likely to be able to take advantage of that, though. So I do like taking shots at McKenzie. He does look a little bit overowned, though, I think, compared to some of the other pitchers around him.
Yeah, especially when you get Kevin Gausman for only slightly more ownership. Like if the options for me are going to be a 29% owned Kevin Gausman or a 21% owned Tristan McKenzie at a similar price point, it's pretty easily Gausman for me.
Yeah, agreed completely.
And if you guys want access to all the stuff like the ownership and player projections, top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, stuff that is really important to me when I build my lineups, I wouldn't be able to make my baseball lineups without them. Certainly wouldn't be able to make profitable lineups. I could just guess and play random shit that probably wouldn't do well. But if you guys want access to the best information to help you win money at MLB DFS, as well as basically every single other DFS sport out there, sign up for a Stokastic Plus membership. And if you sign up right now for the first time using the promo code MLB Strategy Show, that's all one word, all capital letters, you'll get 50% off your first week. And once again, that gets you access to all the tools for every single DFS sport out there. And it's really, really good information you won't find anywhere else, and all kinds of unique tools like the top stacks tool. Find the odds of each team being the top scoring team on the slate, odds of individual pitchers being the top scoring pitchers, all that and a lot more. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. All right, let's move on to the next game now. And this is the Boston Red Sox against the Tampa Bay Rays. Something that was really annoying about the Tampa Bay game last night. And I mean, you came in 5th in the big tournament last night, so maybe it didn't impact you as much. But did you play much McClanahan yesterday?
Yeah, I had like 60-something%.
Yeah, so McClanahan, I'm watching the game. I'm very invested in McClanahan. He's my most rostered player by a mile yesterday. We get a couple innings into the game, and the broadcast says McClanahan is expected to work innings in the All-Star game, so the Rays are going to try to limit his pitch count today. I'm like, well, fuck me. And that's exactly what happened. He's cruising along. They take him out after 85 pitches because he's going to pitch in the All-Star game on short rest. I wish I would have known that ahead of time, but was ultimately something that didn't. And he still pitched well, but it did cap his upside a little bit, and I would have had less exposure to him had I known that was going to be the case going in. That he was going to.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's why. They took him out like in the middle of the 6th inning once he.
Yes, I mean, I knew they took him out in the middle of the 6th. I just figured he had put somebody on base, and they were just like, "All right, get out" or whatever. But,
no, he didn't even put anybody on base. He got the first hitter out, and they were like, "All right, we don't want him to go past this because he's going to be pitching on short rest in the All-Star game."
That is legitimately the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yep. Well, that is exactly what happened, and I was definitely annoyed by it at the time. But for today, we've got two pitchers that I don't think I'm going to have all that much interest in, although this is a game with a really low team total overall, only 7.5 runs. Drew Rasmussen on the mound for the Rays, and then we've got Cutter Crawford for the Red Sox. Crawford's pitched really well with a 28.8% K rate, but I don't think there's all that much to get to in this game. Like, I don't like the pitchers that much, nor do I like the offenses. Is there anything that really stands out to you from this game?
Not a lot. I mean, ballpark's not great for hitting. The pitching is decent, at least on the Tampa Bay side. Rasmussen is solid. not somebody I really want to get to on this slate. Cutter Crawford, not as good, but also facing a Tampa Bay team that isn't very good. I kind of just don't like much of anything here.
Yeah, that's where I stand as well. And Crawford's cheap. He's 6,800. He's also picking up some ownership. The Rays offense is a little bit watered down because Wander Franco is out for the next 6 to 8 weeks with a hand injury. But still, I don't really believe in Cutter Crawford long term. He's had a couple of good individual outings, but not all that much to see. And then Rasmussen, fairly difficult matchup against the Red Sox. The Rays have also been kind of cautious with his pitch count. But then it's also a pitcher-friendly ballpark, so I don't really love the offenses. If you get a couple of stuff here as one-offs, like that would be cool with me. If you were playing 150 lineups, you had a couple of shares of Cutter Crawford, that would be fine. But I mean, we have the Rays and the Red Sox. These are two of the lowest top stack odds teams on the slate, both around 3%. I really don't think I could prioritize anything. So any other comments on this game? If not, we can move on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see priorities. I guess it's worth mentioning Tampa is cheap, and Crawford this year, pretty small sample size, but 280 expected ISO to lefties and 206 to righties. It's just like there's not that many guys in Tampa Bay's lineup that you expect to be able to capitalize on that. But you can certainly get good pitching around a stack of like Choi, Ramirez, Aranda, Rosarena, Walls, or something like that. You know, you can get really good one-offs, really good pitching. So there is some upside there, but I just don't see either side being a priority. And, you know, obviously I'm never upset about getting to the Red Sox, but Rasmussen's a pretty solid pitcher. So it's just really hard for me to think that I'm getting a lot of either of these teams.
Yeah, 11-game slate, and nothing really projects all that well, and we don't have to get exposure to everything. Always nice when we could have some spots that we could write off a little bit. Next game to hit on, Los Angeles Dodgers, St. Louis Cardinals. Dakota Hudson for St. Louis, Tyler Anderson for the Dodgers. Yesterday, I thought the Dodgers were a pretty good contrarian stack to get to because I thought there was potential for some regression coming for Adam Wainwright. The results worked out, not for the reason I thought, because Wainwright pitched really well, and then the Dodgers immediately lit up the Cardinals bullpen as soon as he came out of the game. For today, Dakota Hudson on the mound, and just not a pitcher I'm all that impressed with. Really high ground ball rate, but a 5.25 expected ERA, only a 13.3% K rate. He's never somebody to really play in DFS, particularly not in a spot against the Dodgers. And the Dodgers as a stack today, only projected for 7% ownership. I think this is a good spot to get overweight to the Dodgers again.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of similar to me to the spot yesterday with Wainwright, where not that I think Wainwright and Hudson are that comparable, but they're both decent at preventing runs. You know, Wainwright came in with a 3.77 xFIP. Hudson comes in at 4.77. So again, not that they're really comparable, but Hudson does a good job of limiting power, only allowing a 151 expected ISO to lefties, 184 to righties, 129 actual ISO to righties, sub 100 to lefties this year. So he, like you said, he does a good job keeping the ball on the ground, but I'm just never going to be shying away from the Dodgers against pitchers that are going to let these guys hit the ball. You have a small margin for error with Dakota Hudson. You know, if his command isn't perfect, if he's not locating well, he's just going to get lit up by this team. So with there not being much ownership coming here, I'm going right back to the Dodgers. To me, it's just kind of a similar overall spot where it's like, I don't expect them to just routinely light up Dakota Hudson. Most teams don't, but I also don't think there's a very big margin for error for Hudson against this team.
Yeah, and then the other point, too, is while it's true that Dakota Hudson doesn't get lit up very often, he doesn't face the Dodgers very often. So this is definitely a particular offense that has a lot of upside and could certainly get to Hudson. And then let me look at some of his underlying numbers as well. It's something about now having watched and covered baseball for a lot. Whenever I look up Dakota Hudson, I always type in Daniel Hudson first. Always something that trips me up a little bit. Underlying numbers for Hudson. He has certainly gotten lucky this year with a 4 ERA, with a 5.25 expected ERA. The BABIP's a little low, but that's kind of always been the case for his career, that he's been a lower BABIP guy. But either way, I think the Dodgers, 7% ownership, fair number to get overweight to. We have them projected with a 10% chance to be the top stack. That's the second best odds on the slate behind the Atlanta Braves. So we'll see where that shakes up once we get some updates for some other games, particularly that Toronto game, once a betting line comes in for that. But this looks like a good spot to be overweight to the Dodgers at the very least. On the mound for them is going to be Tyler Anderson. Anderson's had a really good year, but at the same time, the Cardinals hit left-hand pitching really well because they've got two guys in the middle of the order, Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt, that both have crushed left-handed pitching throughout their career. This is another spot where it's hard for me to be interested really in either side. Tyler Anderson, I think, is good enough to where I don't want to stack the Cardinals, but at the same time as well, the Cardinals offense hits lefties well enough to where I don't really want to play Anderson. Do you see anything different about this matchup?
No, I mean, I have a really hard time wanting to get the Anderson here, just given the quality of pitching on this slate. I think he's solid, but you are going up against a good right-handed lineup with St. Louis. Anderson's only struck out 20% of righties this year, 181 expected ISO. If I were to get to one side here, I do think it probably is the Cardinals. But we do also have them projected for about 6% ownership right now, with a 3% chance of being the top stack. So I will pay attention to that ownership number. If that comes down, then I become more interested. Goldschmidt, always somebody I'm willing to play here. Arenado is only getting 2% ownership, so that's nice. Edman's kind of driving the ownership because he's completely mispriced at 3,300 with second base shortstop eligibility. So between the two sides, I lean Cardinals just because outside of Goldschmidt, Arenado, who are both really good, the Cardinals are really cheap for the amount of power and upside that's in this lineup. But I also have respect for Tyler Anderson as a pitcher.
All right, we're about halfway through the show now. We've covered a little more than half the games, and today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you guys not signed up at Prize Picks yet, use the promo code AWESEMO to get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. And the thing that's really great about Prize Picks is if you are living in a state that doesn't have sports betting, there's a good chance you have access to Prize Picks where they give you the ability to bet on player props, parlay player props, build player prop cards. So it's a way to really get action on player props without having access to sportsbook. So that's something that is available over at Prize Picks. We have great projections over at awesemo.com. They're going to help you build some winning player prop cards over on Prize Picks. Especially check out OddsShopper. It's free to use. We've got projected win rates on props. We've also got projected ROIs for stuff when it's, plus 120, minus 140, something that isn't just an even odds bet. What is the percentage ROI on those? So go check out OddsShopper. It's free to use and a really useful resource if you're betting on player props. Moving on with the rest of this slate, the next game to hit on it is the Chicago White Sox against the Minnesota Twins. Johnny Cueto is on the mound for Chicago, and a fairly similar pitcher to Nestor Cortes, at least peak Johnny Cueto was in terms of doing it with weird deliveries and changing up timings of hitters and whatnot. Johnny Cueto this year, he's been decent, but for fantasy purposes, it's kind of hard to roster him because he only has a 19.5% K rate, but there is the 4.09 expected ERA for Cueto. In this matchup against the Twins, are you going to be looking to stack Minnesota against Cueto?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure exactly where you were going with that Cortez comp, but I agree. Like even now, his numbers aren't comparable, but it's the same kind of thing. If you just looked at his stuff, you'd be like, this guy's not a major league pitcher, but he just does enough weird things to upset timing that he's able to get by, and he has been decent this year from a run prevention standpoint. 4.09 xFIP, about a 20% strikeout percentage. Like you said, not somebody that you're really looking to roster in DFS. Minnesota's got plenty of power in their lineup, though. They're projected for 8% ownership, 5% chance of being the top stack. Individually, Buxton leads the way at 14%. Most of the team is, around like 8 to 10% owned. So I think the ownership's about where it should be on Minnesota. I think the spot is fine. It's not one that I think is like going under owned. I think the ownership's about where it should be.
Yeah, and then also when it comes to Johnny Cueto, not a pitcher that I want to roster. There's so many good pitching options on the slate, and he's far exceeded my expectations. I thought he was just going to get crushed this year. That hasn't been the case, but the lack of strikeout stuff doesn't really make him a pitcher to play in DFS. That and he hasn't been that cheap either. He is $8,700 over on DraftKings. That's more than I want to pay for him. Over on FanDuel, he is $9,200. That's an unplayable price point. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah, so Cueto, that is going to be a no-go. A million better of the whatever amount of pitchers we have to choose from, 22. There's like 26 I'd rather get to than Johnny Cueto. So that is going to be of no interest for me. On the other side, Sonny Gray is starting for the Minnesota Twins. Really good numbers for Gray this year. 3.09 expected ERA, 22.6% K rate. Matchup against the White Sox, where yesterday, the White Sox were my favorite stack to be overweight to the field to. And it started off looking pretty good. They got a couple guys on base. Eloy Jimenez flies out, missed a home run by about 2 feet in the first inning. Aaron Savali was on the mound. I'm thinking like, all right, this is going to be the White Sox day. They finally got the lineup healthy. They got a good matchup against Aaron Savali. Then things very rapidly came undone. Savali only pitched 1 inning. He gets hurt. Eloy Jimenez, he leaves the game with an injury. So once again, we have another key player out of the White Sox lineup with Eloy, I assume, missing. Probably time up until the All-Star break, because why would they risk him at this point? Assuming Sonny Gray gets to face a White Sox lineup without Eloy, how does he look in tournaments?
I think he looks kind of similar to Kyle Wright for me, where it's not It's clearly not as good a matchup as Tristan McKenzie has against Detroit. It's obviously not as good a matchup as Kevin Gausman has against the Omaha Royals. But 8K for Sonny Gray, getting 8% ownership. I do like that in tournaments and lineups where you do have more popular hitters because Gray is a good pitcher. You can kind of point to limitations on going deep into games, but I think that's kind of overstated this year because it's been a really weird year for Gray where he was limited at the start of the year because pretty much every pitcher was with the abbreviated spring training. Then he was injured, so he came back, he was on a pitch count for a couple of games. Then he got injured again, so he came back, was on a pitch count for a couple of games. And then looking at his recent games, so since he's come back from his most recent injury, 65 pitches, then 85 pitches, then 97 pitches. Then a game where he threw 87 pitches, gave up 3 runs in 5 innings. Game where he threw 82 pitches, but he gave up 5 runs in 4 2/3. So I think if you're just looking at how deep he's gone into games, it's really misleading here because it doesn't tell the story of what he can do when he's actually pitching well, because we just haven't seen that many games this year where he's A, fully healthy, and B, pitches well. So I do think that projections might just end up being a little bit low on Gray because they weight what he's done innings pitched wise to this year too heavily. And at 8K for a guy with, he only has a 22.6% strikeout percentage this year, but 3.81 xFIP, and in previous years he's had a much better strikeout percentage. I'm interested in him in tournaments. The issue is just like it is with Wright. You're going to have McKenzie against the Tigers, you're going to have Gausman against Kansas City, so those guys obviously look a little bit better.
Yeah, and we just had Stephen Leibowitz asked in chat, has his strikeout rate come down recently? His last start, he pitched 4 2/3 innings and didn't generate any strikeouts. That really brought down his K rate. Like, that's what's kind of making it look off. And then to Adam's point from before, his strikeout rate was really high in previous years. So last year was 27%, the year before 30.6. In 2019, it was 29. So we've seen him be a pitcher in recent years that generates a whole lot of strikeouts. This is going to be a watered down version of the White Sox lineup. I think he's worth getting to, just if nothing else for contrarian purposes, because we have Sonny Gray projected for 8% ownership today at 8,000. There's other guys I like more than him, but if you're playing a chalky lineup and need a pitcher to differentiate with, I think he fits the bill in that kind of scenario.
Yeah, and one other thing to comment on the recent strikeout percentage, because it is down. Like if you go game by game, over his last 6, it's 20%, 16.7, 20%, 13%, 20%, and 0 against the Rangers. But even within those games, you had the one game where he got hurt against Kansas City and left the game. Then you had, the games where he came back, but 2 of those starts were also against Cleveland, which is one of the most difficult teams to strike out. It's really just like, you don't want to get bogged down in what pitchers have done too recently. Like, I care more about what Sonny Gray's done over the last few years than I do his 12 starts entirely this season, much less what he's done in his last few.
Yeah, I think that all totally makes sense. And also, for tournament purposes, he's not popular, which is something else that kind of plays in our favor. Let's move on to the next game here. Chicago Cubs at home against the New York Mets. Really low total in this game, only 7.5 runs, another game with a low total. There actually aren't that many games with high totals today. We only have one game with a total over 9. That's that Braves-Washington game, and almost all the runs are expected to be scored by Atlanta. So not a lot of games with high totals. This is another lower total game. On the mound for the Cubs, Keegan Thompson, 3.51 expected ERA, 23.4% K rate. It's a tough matchup for him against the Mets, but he's been pretty impressive to this point this season.
Yeah, I saw somebody mention him in chat earlier, and I think he's reasonable here. I think he's very obviously underpriced at 5,800. Like, this guy just isn't a $5,800 pitcher. He has a 22.5% strikeout percentage this year. To put that in context, we did just kind of say that I don't care too much about Sonny Gray's strikeout percentage this year, but it's the same as Sonny Gray. It's less than a point lower than Tristan McKenzie. 4.27 xFIP is fine when you're talking about a $5,800 pitcher. The 2 biggest issues I have with actually getting him into DFS lineups today is, 1, the matchup against the Mets is tough. They're a very productive offense, and they're an offense that's difficult to strike out. 2, I said there were 2 things. There's actually 3. 2, there's so much opportunity cost at pitcher today. I don't think it's going to be a slate where, like, if you get 12, 13, 14 points from a $5,800 pitcher, I don't think it's likely that it's like, oh, cool, I got good value there. That really helped me win. Chances are you're just giving up like 10 points at the position to these other high-end pitchers. And then 3, which is kind of an extension of 2, hitter pricing isn't tight. So it's unlikely that you're really going to need to go down to Keegan Thompson to open up great bats. Like, chances are there's going to be plenty of value bats to come through and make it so the winning lineups just have 2 of the highest scoring pitchers and the highest scoring stack. It's unlikely that, you really need a 2x value guy. So I think it's tough to get to Thompson today. That said, if you do have a lineup where you need to pay down, I do think Thompson's underpriced.
Yeah, and that's been the case a lot lately. There just hasn't been that much of a need for cheap starting pitching because we just got off of was it three days in a row where half the Padres lineup was priced ridiculously cheap on DraftKings, and when they had an implied team total of over 6. When you get scenarios like that, there just isn't going to be all that much need for to pay up to pay down a pitcher because it's easy enough to get to the high end pitchers, and that's going to be another slate like that today. And that's why on the other side of this game, Carlos Carrasco, his numbers this year have actually kind of been a little bit underwhelming with a 22.7% K rate and a 4.03 expected ERA. There's been a bunch of slates where he's been popular and he's only 7,600 today, but I just don't know that I'm going to need to get to him. I would much rather pay the $1,000 to get to Kevin Gausman or the 1,500 extra to get to Carlos Rodon. So another guy in Carlos Carrasco who just kind of has mediocre numbers this year. The matchup is decent. I just think he's unnecessary.
Yeah, I think the ownership on him makes sense. He's getting about 15% ownership right now. He's a little bit cheaper than your McKenzie, Wright, Gray guys. And it does look like the wind's expected to be blowing in at Wrigley. You have like a 3.5, 3.6 implied run total on the Cubs. There are strikeouts in this lineup. Carrasco's biggest issue this year has been left-handed power. He has a 25.8% strikeout percentage against lefties, which is good, but he's also allowed a 198 actual ISO and a 258 expected ISO, 347 WOBA, 370 expected WOBA. The Cubs don't have a lot of left-handed power, though. They have a right-handed heavy lineup. Rafael Ortega is likely to be leading off. He's left-handed, but doesn't have a ton of power. Ian Happ is a pretty good pick for a home run today. But outside of that, it's just basically a right-handed lineup. Most of the power bats in this lineup are right-handed, and Carrasco's held them to a 136 actual ISO, 135 expected ISO this year. So I think it sets up as a good spot for Carrasco. I like getting to him, but like you were saying, it's just there's going to be a lot of lineups where you get the hitters you want, and then it's just like, oh, okay, well, I'll choose between Carlos Carrasco and Kevin Gausman, and I'm normally just going to take Kevin Gausman.
Yeah, same boat as me. And then as far as offenses go, just because both these pitchers, while neither of them have been outstanding this year, they've both been solid. And then the wind is blowing in. It's going to be hard for me to really prioritize any of these offenses. I think there's much better spots to get to. But could you talk me into playing either the Mets or the Cubs offense in bulk today?
Yes and no. I mean, the Mets are good and they're not going to be popular. So that would be the case that I would make for them. For the Cubs, it would be that Carrasco has had those home run issues. But like I was just saying, it's mostly been left-handed power. So this game kind of reminds me of the Tampa Bay game where the Mets are basically the equivalent of the Red Sox, where they're good enough that I don't mind getting to them, but I don't think I really will. And then the Cubs are more equivalent to Tampa Bay, where there's maybe some home run issues for Carrasco, but there's also just not a lot of hitters in this lineup that I really like.
Yeah, I think that is a good comp, kind of that Tampa Bay Boston game where nothing looks all that appealing. I do think Carrasco is probably the best option of anything in those games, but it's nothing I'm really dying to get to. The next game to talk about here is the Seattle Mariners against the Texas Rangers, and two left-hand pitchers that don't generate many strikeouts on the mound. Martin Perez for Texas, Marco Gonzalez for Seattle. I want to start by talking about Perez because overall his numbers for the year, 3.27 expected ERA. That's really solid. The K's, they've never really been there for Perez. He generates a lot of ground balls, though, so he's been successful from that standpoint. This has clearly been the best year of his career, but we've started to see a little bit of a chink in the armor, whereas in the last few starts for Perez, it's gone a little bit wayward for him. Last time out, he pitched 6 innings against the Twins. He gave up 6 runs. It was his third start in a row that he gave up 3 or more runs, and he also gave up multiple homers now in back-to-back starts. So through the first 15 starts of the year, Martin Perez had only given up 2 homers, and now he's given up 6 homers because he's given up 4 homers in each of his last 2 starts. So he's matched his home run total for the season in his last 2 outings. Considering we've never really seen much success from Martin Perez in the past, and this has really been an outlier season, should we expect regression going forward? And is this a spot for the Seattle Mariners, who've played really well as of late, to take advantage of a pitcher who might be regressing?
I think it's kind of yes and no. I certainly expect regression going forward for Perez, but I don't expect, I think there's a lot of time, not saying that you're doing it, but like when somebody says a pitcher is going to regress, the immediate assumption is like they're going to become bad. I don't think he's going to become bad. I think he's just going to be worse than he has been. He's got a career high left on base percentage at 76%, but his career average is like 71%. So you're not talking about, him stranding every runner. Like we had somebody last year that was at like 100% through like 12 starts or something. I can't remember who it was.
Robbie Ray.
Yeah, that's what you're right. So yeah, it's not that extreme. It's like, yeah, he's getting lucky there, but not crazy lucky. He does have the best ground ball percentage that he's had since 2016, so that's something that's good for him. He has the best xFIP of his career. But like if you look at his ISO allowed versus expected ISO, he's allowed a 110 actual ISO to righties, 138 expected ISO, 0.039 actual ISO to lefties, 107 expected ISO. So there's regression there, but 107 and 139 is still really good at limiting power. It's not somebody that you're really going to be that excited to take hitters against. So my answer kind of is just, I don't think Martin Perez is as good as he has been. He's not somebody that I like to roster in DFS one way or the other because the strikeouts aren't there. But I'm also not super excited to get to the Mariners because even if he does regress, I don't expect him to be bad. So Julio Rodriguez, Ty France, Eugenio Suarez, those guys are all solid plays, but they don't really stand out as great on this slate as a whole, I don't think. And Seattle in general, I think, is kind of just the middle of the road team.
Yeah, last year, Robbie Ray finished with something like a 91 or 92% strand rate. It was the first time in baseball history that a starter ever had a left on base rate over 90%. And I guess that's going to trend upwards just because there's more strikeouts. But even this year, the highest strand rate is Shane McClanahan at 87%. So that over 90% from Robbie Ray last year, it's crazy high. That's going to be a number that's really, really difficult to match. But anyway, Martin Perez, I do think he's going to be worse going forward. And I agree with you. It doesn't mean he's going to suck, but I do think he's probably a guy who's most likely to have an ERA like high threes, low fours the rest of the season. Just won't have that much utility for DFS. If I'm picking a side, it's almost always going to be stacking against Martin Perez as opposed to rostering Perez. And then pitching for the Mariners, Marco Gonzalez is on the mound, and his number is also pretty underwhelming for the year. 4.64 ERA, 12.1% K rate. The Rangers are finally getting production out of Marcus Semien, which has made the offense far better than it was in the first month of the season. Going up against Marco Gonzalez, are the Rangers a team you're looking to stack?
Yeah, I'm interested in the Rangers here just because, I mean, I've never thought Gonzalez was good, but he used to be better at just not getting lit up. But he's just one of these pitchers that, like, as they get older, they are typically going to age really poorly. He's really, really reliant on command, getting infield fly balls, limiting hard contact. He doesn't have great stuff. And so far this year, 180 expected ISO to righties, 248 to lefties, 13% strikeout percentage to lefties, 12% to righties. Semien, I think, looks good, albeit expensive, but good. Adolis Garcia looks good. Jonah Heim looks like a solid catching option, probably hitting cleanup. Corey Seager, lefty is expensive, but I still think it's a decent matchup. Overall, I think Texas is kind of just middle of the road here when you factor in the pricing, but I do like the matchup against Gonzalez.
Yeah, there's just not really been that much redeeming about Marco Gonzalez. He also allows a lot of fly balls, which means there's potential for upside for the opposing offenses. The Rangers are going to be somewhat popular today. They look a little bit overowned right now at 6%, but once again, we're going to need an update in what all these ownership projections really look like once there's an updated betting line for that Royals Blue Jays game, because I really do think that's going to change a whole lot in terms of ownership for Kevin Gausman, ownership for the Blue Jays, and then a trickle-down effect that's going to affect all the other pitchers and offenses on the slate. So make sure to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the deeper dive and live before lock later in the day when we really have a better sense for what all of those situations are going to look like. But before then, a couple more games to talk about on this slate. The next one being the Los Angeles Angels against the Houston Astros. Reed Detmer's on the mound for the Angels. Framber Valdez on the mound for Houston. So Valdez generally hasn't been a pitcher in the past that's generated very many strikeouts. This year, though, we've actually seen some strikeout upside from him. The K rate is only 21.8%, but there have been some individual outings where we've seen a ceiling for strikeouts. And he's going up against an Angels team that does swing and miss a lot. There are a lot of good pitchers to get to, Adam. Is Framber Valdez one of them?
He's the $9,700 version of Kyle Wright and Sonny Gray to me. He's projected to be under-owned, 14% chance of being a top two pitcher, 8% projected ownership. He's a good real-life pitcher. Like you said, the strikeout stuff isn't great, 21.8% this season, 3.22 xFIP. Really good at getting ground balls, really good at limiting contact. Facing an Angels team that is either going to have a good strikeout lineup or a really good strikeout lineup, depending who's in it. Like, they rested Stefanich yesterday. He's somebody that doesn't strike out a lot. They were without Mike Trout yesterday. Don't know if he'll be back today. But one way or the other, there's a lot of strikeouts to be had here. The issue that I have is just Framber Valdez and his 22% strikeout percentage is more expensive than every single pitcher on the slate except for Corbin Burns. So it's more of a spot where, like, if I'm playing a couple of popular stacks together, then yeah, maybe I go to Valdez over Carlos Rodon, or I go to Valdez over Gausman. But assuming I've taken care of my ownership issues elsewhere in my lineup, there's just no real reason for me to get to him over a pitcher that projects a lot better.
Yeah, I totally am on the same page there when it comes to Framber Valdez, especially just because his price point being fairly expensive. Other guys that I'd rather get to on the slate. But at the same time, too, I don't really have any interest in stacking the Angels against him. I understand he had that start where he got lit up. Who was that against? Framber Valdez. Was it against the A's or the Royals? I know he had an easy matchup where he was really popular and he just didn't really come through.
I think it was the A's. No, he hasn't really gotten lit up by anybody. He gave up 2 earned runs against Oakland.
I'm thinking of the Christian Javier start. I'm getting them mixed up. It was Javier who got really lit up by the Royals as a really chalky pitcher. But yeah, overall from Framber Valdez, we've seen him be solid and not really have too many starts where he's gotten. Well, actually, he only has 1 start all year. He's given up more than 3 runs. So I don't think that the Angels are going to be a team to stack against them today.
No, I mean, it's the obvious. If you get to Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, Taylor Ward, those guys are fine, but I don't see anything with the Angels.
And then what do you make of Reed Detmers? Understandable. It's a difficult matchup, so people aren't going to want to play him. But Detmers was a guy who, coming into the year, was one of the top-rated pitching prospects in baseball. He did have a no-hitter early on, and he's found some success, 4.22 ERA, 4.73 expected ERA. So not great, but not terrible. But one thing that does stand out to me is after a slow start to the year from a strikeout perspective, his last 3 starts, 6 strikeouts, 6 strikeouts, 7 strikeouts. The Angels also sent him to the minor leagues to get some extra work, and he struck out 14 hitters in a minor league start. I don't know that this is the spot to get to him because of the matchup against Houston, but could we see more strikeouts coming in the future for Reed Detmers?
I think you could. You've seen increased slider usage in two of his 3 most recent starts where those strikeouts have been up. For the season, he's averaged 18.6% slider usage, 31.3% against the Dodgers 3 starts ago, 39.6% against Baltimore last start. If that continues, it would make sense for him to get more strikeouts potentially. But this is a spot where I think it's kind of a moot point because Houston has such a dangerous lineup. They have a lot of good right-handed hitters in this lineup. Detmers so far this year has allowed a 206 actual ISO, a 250 expected ISO with about a 20% strikeout percentage against righties. It's just going to be pretty close to impossible for me to want to get to Detmers here.
Did Anibal Sanchez get scratched? That's what people are saying in chat.
No, Jesus Sanchez got scratched from the Marlins.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, I got confused too, so I looked it up.
All right, guys. So Anibal Sanchez is still starting today for the Nationals. Still a really good spot for the Braves. It was a starting lineup change for the Miami Marlins in the afternoon game. So don't worry about for tonight's slate. No real difference. Anibal Sanchez will still be starting for the Nationals, at least as of now. Watch something happen where he gets scratched anyway. We had that. Do you remember the Rudy Gobert game where there was the random report that was on the player card on DraftKings that Rudy Gobert wasn't going to play during the NBA season, and it was a never-ending debate in the YouTube chat?
Yeah, vaguely. I didn't remember who the player was, but I remember the conversation.
Yeah. It's one of those situations. Don't worry. Anibal Sanchez, at least as of now, he is pitching today. But let's hit on now the final game of the slate, and that is the Milwaukee Brewers against the San Francisco Giants. This is one of the best pitching matchups we could possibly get. Carlos Rodon on the mound for San Francisco. Corbin Burnes from Milwaukee. Both these guys have been insanely good. Expected ERAs in the low 3s. Both of them have K rates north of 30%. They're currently projected to be the 2 highest owned pitchers on the entire slate, which I think is more than justified. Do you have a preference between these 2 studs?
I guess Rodon, just because he's $1,300 less expensive, but not really. I mean, I don't think there's much separating them. Burnes has been slightly better this year, slightly higher strikeout percentage, slightly lower walk percentage, slightly better xFIP, but both just 2 of the best pitchers in baseball, pitching in the best pitchers park. I don't really have much of a preference other than I assume Rodon's going to fit into lineups a little bit easier.
Yeah, this may come as a surprise to people because they know how much I like Corbin Burnes. But as of right now, if this ownership holds, I would prefer playing Gausman to both of them. He's the cheapest of the 3 and then is also picking up the least ownership. I also think he is the best matchup. I understand San Francisco is a much better pitcher's park than Toronto, but that Kansas City Royals lineup, as you called it, which I think is very funny, the Omaha Royals, it's so bad that I think I'm going to prefer Gausman in tournaments over the other 2, but we'll see if that ownership for him changes later on in the day. But it is really hard to differentiate between Burnes and Rodon. They've both been so good. They both have such high K percentages. And it's not like the ownership is 50% or anything on either of them. It's fairly modest, 38% Rodon, 32.5% for Burnes over on DK. On FanDuel, 20% for Rodon, 16.5% for Burnes. So none of that's problematic for me. Probably pitchers I'll be overweight to Offenses, I can't consider either offense in this spot.
Yeah, I have nothing offense-wise. Both of these pitchers are so good. The park is so tough to hit in. I mean, both offenses have power and have upside, but I don't see a reason to get to either one here.
All right, so that brings us through all the games on the slate. Adam, do you have any other final thoughts for today?
I guess just from like a macro view of this slate, there's a lot of good pitching. There's not much in the way of offense that stands out. Like there were a couple teams that we really liked the matchup, Cleveland, Atlanta. But I think it's a really interesting Toronto. But I think it's a really interesting tournament slate because I think you're just going to get one of those slates where for the most part, all the offenses are just like clustered together in terms of top stack percentage, but you're always still going to get disproportionate ownership going to a few offenses because that's how people play. So I don't know. I really like those slates and tournaments. I'm excited for it. It's a nice change from the last few days where you've just had to decide what to do with the 40% owned Padres.
Yeah, where you've got for random reason, like, hey, cool, Nomar Mazara and Eric Hosmer are two of the top 5 hitters in the Padres lineup, and they're both min-priced at Coors Field against a bad pitcher. None of that is in consideration today. So more of a normal slate. Guys, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all the content we have later on the day, MLB Deeper Dive, MLB Live before lock. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope to see you later.